The winter storm tore across the Montana mountains with a force that seemed to shake the very earth. Sergeant Cole Matthews tightened his grip on the outpost door against the roaring wind, ready to seal it for the night. Then, through the whiteout haze, he caught the sudden flash of movement, a small figure stumbling toward him, clutching a German shepherd against her chest. The girl's cheeks were raw from the cold, her hair tangled with ice, the dog's leg bound in a bloodied strip of cloth. Cole had long since learned that life rarely followed the mission plan. Years of service had carved discipline into his bones, but nothing in his training could erase the quiet grief of losses carried in silence. Alone at Outpost Haven with a missing rescue team that included his younger brother, he knew the dangers of these mountains better than most. At 38, Cole had the steady eyes of a man who had faced both battlefield chaos and the still, aching void of waiting for news that might never come. The walls of the outpost were lined with tools, maps, and the smell of pine from the wood stove his world for countless seasons of cold watch. The people in these valleys respected Cole's unshakable presence, but few knew the depth of the loyalty that kept him standing his post, no matter the storm. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to see the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below the video. Thank you. Amen. The town of Rockford Ridge, Montana, lay buried under the worst winter storm in 2 decades. Snow fell in relentless sheets, whipping sideways in the 50-mile-per-hour winds that howled through the surrounding mountain passes. The temperature had plunged well below zero, and the air was thick with fine, needle-like ice crystals that bit into exposed skin. The sky had been a flat, iron gray since morning, and by nightfall, it was as if the world had been swallowed whole by the blizzard. On the outskirts of town, perched at the edge of the tree line like a solitary sentinel, stood Outpost Haven, a small but sturdy border patrol station, built from heavy pine logs darkened by years of storms and sun. Its only connection to the outside world was a snow-covered gravel road that vanished into the white void after just 100 yards. Inside, Sergeant Cole Matthews was on his 3rd round of pacing the narrow main room, the creak of the floorboards nearly lost beneath the howl of the wind battering the windows. At 38, Cole carried himself with the precision and alertness of a career soldier, though the lines etched into his face spoke of battles fought beyond the battlefield. Broad-shouldered and tall, his frame was built for endurance rather than speed. His hazel eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room in constant motion, as if expecting trouble to seep in through the walls. His brown hair was cut short, the kind of military trim he'd kept for 20 years, and flecked at the temples with gray. A faint scar curved across his left cheekbone, earned in Afghanistan when shrapnel had torn through his Humvee's window during a night patrol. Cole's demeanor was measured, bordering on stoic. Years of service had taught him to compartmentalize fear and pain, to focus on the mission above all else. But that composure was harder to maintain tonight. For 2 days, he'd been trying to raise contact with a missing search and rescue team who had been sent to recover stranded climbers. The storm had swallowed them whole somewhere between the ridge and the frozen river valley, and among them was his younger brother, Ethan Matthews. Ethan was 5 years his junior, a medic with the kind of restless energy Cole had never shared. Shorter, leaner, quick to smile, and stubborn enough to argue with a blizzard if it meant saving someone's life. Cole had always felt the weight of responsibility for his brother, and that weight was crushing tonight. The radio console on the desk in the corner hissed with static, an unbroken wall of white noise that mocked every attempt to reach command. The only other sound in the room was the occasional pop from the wood stove. Cole adjusted the strap of the rifle slung across his chest and checked the window facing the road. Visibility was no more than 20 feet. The knock came suddenly, sharp and desperate, cutting through the wind's howl like a flare in darkness. 3 rapid strikes, a pause, then 2 more, harder. Cole's training kicked in immediately. His hand dropped to the pistol holstered at his hip, and he moved to the heavy oak door in 3 long strides. He hesitated only long enough to glance at the peephole, but all he saw was a blur of white. With a firm pull, he opened the door and the storm roared into the room. Standing there was a girl, no more than 9 years old, her cheeks raw and red from the cold, her lips trembling with each breath. Her hair was pale blonde, tangled and matted with snow, strands sticking to her face. Her eyes were wide and glassy, an icy blue that seemed to absorb the dim light from inside. She wore a red wool sweater far too big for her small frame, the sleeves fraying at the cuffs. In her arms, she clutched a German shepherd, its muscular body sagging slightly against her as if exhausted. One of its front legs was wrapped in a strip of white cloth, now soaked through with blood. Cole stepped aside without thinking. "Get in here." The girl staggered forward, boots thumping against the wood floor. As soon as the door slammed shut, the storm was muffled again to a distant roar. Cole took the dog from her carefully and lowered it onto a folded blanket near the stove. The animal let out a low whine, ears flicking back but not in aggression. "What's your name?" Cole asked, crouching to examine the wound. "Lily. Lily Harper," she said, still catching her breath. Her voice was thin, but there was a stubborn steadiness in it. "And this is Ranger." Ranger was an imposing dog even in his weakened state, around 7 years old, judging by the silver beginning to frost his muzzle. His coat was sable and tan, thick and clean under the crust of ice, his amber eyes sharp and alert despite the injury. His frame was lean but solid, his muscles still tense under Cole's hands. Cole could tell by the dog's calm watchfulness and measured movements that he had been trained for more than companionship. "You did a decent job on the bandage," Cole noted, glancing up. "Where'd you learn how to wrap a wound like this?" "My mom taught me," Lily replied quickly, her gaze darting toward the floor as if she'd said too much. There was a flicker in her expression, grief or fear that Cole recognized but didn't press. He fetched the station's medical kit and worked quietly, cleaning the gash with warm water before rewrapping it in fresh gauze. Ranger flinched but didn't growl, keeping his eyes on Cole's face as if measuring his intent. Cole had always trusted animals' instincts, and something in Ranger's steady gaze told him this dog was worth listening to. Once the worst of his bleeding was under control, Cole sat back. "Where are your parents, Lily?" Her fingers tightened around the mug of hot cocoa he'd placed in her hands. "I can't go back there. There's a man. He wants Ranger. He's not going to stop until he finds us." Cole's jaw tightened. Outside, the wind slammed against the walls like a warning. He wanted to ask more, but the radio crackled just then, only for the sound to dissolve back into static. He cursed under his breath. Not only was there a child and a wounded dog in his care now, but his brother was still out there somewhere in the storm. "You're safe here for now," he told her, keeping his tone even. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Ranger lifted his head at the sound of Cole's voice, then settled it back onto his paws. Lily's eyes followed every movement Cole made, her shoulders slowly easing as the warmth from the stove and the cocoa worked their way through her. Still, there was a shadow in her gaze that told him she wasn't used to feeling safe and that whatever had driven her here was far from over. Cole moved to the window again, peering into the swirling darkness. Somewhere out there, Ethan's team was either hunkered down or fighting for their lives. And now, he had another mission just as urgent, keeping Lily and Ranger out of whatever danger was chasing them. In the heart of the storm, two paths had collided, and Cole knew with absolute certainty that neither was going to end quietly. The storm outside hadn't eased, it still clawed at the windows of Outpost Haven like some living thing, each gust sending a shudder through the heavy log walls. Inside, however, the air was warmer now, scented faintly of wood smoke and the antiseptic Cole had used to clean Ranger's wound. The dog lay curled on a folded quilt near the stove, his amber eyes following every movement with the calm vigilance of an animal trained to assess threats. His breathing had steadied, but each time his weight shifted, his injured leg trembled slightly under the fresh bandage. Lily Harper sat perched on the edge of a battered leather armchair, her knees drawn up to her chest inside the oversized red sweater. The sleeves hung past her hands, and she would occasionally tug at the fraying edges as though the motion helped her think. Her cheeks were less flushed now, though the cold had left them chapped, and her pale hair was beginning to dry in uneven strands that framed her wary expression. She looked more fragile in the glow of the stove, but her eyes, those startling icy blue eyes, remained alert, taking in everything about the room and about him. Cole had seen that kind of vigilance before in civilians who'd lived too long on the edge of danger. It was the same in war zones, in refugee camps, in children who had learned too early that the world was not safe. He set 2 mugs of hot tea on the table, one within her reach. "This'll help warm you up. It's stronger than cocoa." She nodded, wrapping both hands around it, but didn't drink right away. He decided to circle back to the question he'd asked before. "You said someone's looking for you, someone who wants Ranger." His voice was low, calm, but it carried the firmness of a man used to getting answers. For a moment, she just stared at the steam rising from her cup. Then she said, "We lived in a house down in Miller's Valley. My mom, Her voice caught, and she took a quick sip of tea before starting again. "She's gone now. I was staying with someone else. A man named Travis Kane." She spoke the name like it tasted bitter. Cole had heard the name before, though only in passing. Travis Kane was a local rancher in his mid-40s, tall and broad, with a black Stetson always perched on his head. The last time Cole had seen him, months ago in town, he'd been leaning against the side of his truck, jaw set in a scowl, talking too fast to the county sheriff. His reputation was a mix of respect and suspicion, generous to some, but with a temper that could curdle any conversation. Lily's eyes flicked toward Ranger. Travis wanted to sell him, said he was worth a lot to the right kind of buyer, but Ranger wouldn't let him near me. He'd growl whenever Travis came close. She pulled the sweater tighter around her. "Last night I heard him on the phone. He said someone would pay double if he delivered Ranger by the end of the week. I knew that meant today, so I left before sunrise." Cole listened without interrupting, his mind filing away every detail. He glanced toward Ranger, who had lifted his head at the mention of Travis's name. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his gaze locked on Lily as if reaffirming his role. Cole turned toward the radio console in the corner. The green light on its panel flickered faintly, struggling against the static hiss. He adjusted the frequency dial, tapping the mic. "Base command, this is Outpost Haven, over." Nothing but the low, steady rush of white noise. He tried again on another channel, then another. After the third attempt, a voice crackled, faintly female, tense. "Haven, this is dispatch, copy?" "This is Haven. Do you have any updates on Rescue Unit Bravo? Last known location?" Cole asked quickly. The voice came back fractured by interference. "Negative contact for 36 hours. Last ping near Northridge Crossing. Storm blocking most signals. Over." Cole swore under his breath. Northridge Crossing was a dangerous stretch of road even in fair weather. A narrow pass with steep drop-offs and sharp turns. If Ethan's team was stranded there, the conditions could already be lethal. Behind him, Lily spoke up. "Are you looking for someone?" Cole hesitated, then nodded. "My brother's with the rescue team that's missing. I need to find him as soon as this storm lets up." He didn't add that the blizzard could bury them long before then. She bit her lip, as if weighing whether to speak. "I know some of the trails near North Ridge. My mom used to take me up there in summer to pick huckleberries. There's a cabin halfway down the east slope. It's not on the maps. We stayed there once when we got caught in a storm." Cole turned toward her fully now, his attention sharpened. "Could you find it again?" She nodded. "If we can see the trees. But in this..." She gestured toward the rattling window. For a moment, silence hung in the room except for the wind and the faint crackle of the radio. Cole glanced again at Ranger, who was now sitting upright despite the bandaged leg, ears turning toward each sound outside. The dog seemed to sense the undercurrent of urgency. In the back of the room, the heavy boots of another figure thudded against the floorboards. Corporal Jim Harlow emerged from the small bunk room, rubbing his eyes. He was in his late 20s, shorter than Cole but stocky, with sandy blonde hair and a boyish face that hadn't yet lost its easy grin, though tonight it was absent. Harlow had been Cole's second in command at the outpost for 2 years, steady under pressure, but prone to speaking his mind. "Radio still giving you trouble?" he asked, glancing between Cole and Lily. "Yeah, we got a partial from dispatch Ethan's team last pinged near North Ridge." Harlow's gaze shifted to Lily. "And who's this?" "Lily Harper. She and her dog are staying here until the storm passes," Cole said evenly. Harlow crouched to give Ranger a gentle scratch behind the ears. "That's one fine dog you've got there," he said. Ranger's tail thumped once against the quilt. Lily managed a small smile, but it vanished quickly. "Someone's coming for him," she murmured. Harlow straightened, eyebrows lifting. "Someone like who?" "Travis Kane," Cole said. "And whoever's paying him." That name wiped the trace of humor from Harlow's face. "Kane's bad news. If he's in on something shady, it's not just about the dog." Cole nodded grimly. "Which means we're on watch until this storm breaks. And if Kane's willing to track them through weather like this, we might not have until morning." Ranger let out a low, warning growl, his gaze fixed on the door. Cole felt the hairs on his neck rise. The storm might have been their cover for now, but it was also the perfect mask for someone moving in on them. Somewhere out there, Ethan was fighting to survive, and here inside the outpost, another kind of fight was taking shape. Cole didn't know yet how the two would collide, but his gut told him they would, and soon. By dawn, the storm had dulled from a raging blizzard to a heavy, muffled snowfall. The air was sharp and brittle, each breath burning in Cole's lungs as he stepped outside. The world was cloaked in a muted gray light, snowdrifts piled high against the outpost walls. His boots sank deep into the powder as he circled the perimeter, scanning for anything the storm might have hidden. Ranger followed close behind despite his limp, moving with the quiet precision of an animal who had learned to patrol beside a human partner. The fresh bandage on his leg was already dusted with white. Cole stopped short when he reached the eastern side of the outpost. There, pressed into the snow and half filled with ice crystals, were the tire tracks of a pickup truck. The tread was distinctive deep, worn along the edges, with one groove narrower than the rest. He crouched to touch the frozen impression. The snow inside the grooves had a faint crust, telling him the tracks were at least several hours old, likely from last night, before the storm peaked. Harlow emerged from around the corner, his parka hood pulled low. "Find something?" he asked, brushing snow from his gloves. Cole gestured to the tracks. Pickup stopped here during the storm, long enough for snow to settle before it pulled out. This wasn't a passerby, someone was watching us. Ranger sniffed at the ground, then followed the faint trail toward the tree line before pausing to look back at Cole. The dog's posture was alert but tense, his ears angled toward the distant forest. Inside the outpost, Lily was sitting at the table, the oversized sweater hanging off one shoulder. She had a notebook open, but the pencil in her hand hadn't moved in minutes. When Cole came in, brushing snow from his coat, she glanced up, her gaze immediately darting toward Ranger as he trotted in behind him. "We had a visitor last night," Cole said evenly, leaning against the table. "Pickup truck. You know anyone who drives something like that?" Lily's fingers tightened around the pencil. "Travis does. It's green with a dent on the passenger side door." Her voice was quiet but steady. Cole exchanged a look with Harlow, who was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. The corporal didn't need to say what they were both thinking. Travis Kane had come looking, and the storm hadn't stopped him. After a pause, Lily added, "Ranger wasn't always just my dog. He used to work for the sheriff's department." She looked at Ranger with something like pride. "He was trained for search and rescue and K-9 patrol. But when my mom and I moved to Miller's Valley, he came with us. Last summer, he bit a man, a bad man." Cole kept his voice calm. "What kind of bad man?" She took a breath, her small shoulders squaring as if bracing for judgment. "A man who was trying to sell guns out of the barn behind Travis's place. Ranger caught him sneaking something into his truck. The man hit me when I tried to run inside and call for help. Ranger, he didn't let him get away. The sheriff took the man, but he was out again a week later. Travis said Ranger had made enemies." That fit too well with what Cole had suspected since the moment she arrived. This wasn't just about money. Someone wanted to settle a score, and the dog was the target. Before Cole could respond, the radio console crackled again. He crossed the room quickly, adjusting the dial. This time the voice was faint but clearer than before. A man's voice, strained. "Bravo unit, position compromised. Anyone copy?" Cole's pulse jumped. "Bravo unit, this is Outpost Haven. Say again your location." The reply came in broken bursts, nearly drowned by static. "Ridge, East Slope, Marker 7. Cole grabbed the map pinned above the desk. Marker 7 was just under 3 miles from the outpost close, but through deep snow and heavy timber. Harlow peered over his shoulder. "We could make it if we move fast, but..." His gaze flicked toward Lily, and there was the choice. Cole could suit up and head out to reach Ethan's team before they froze or were found by the wrong people. Or he could stay here to guard Lily and Ranger, knowing that if Travis was close enough to leave tire tracks, he might return any minute. "Could we call for backup?" Harlow asked, though they both knew the answer. "Nearest unit's over 40 miles south, and in this weather, they won't make it before nightfall," Cole said. He stared at the map, weighing the pull in his chest, the duty to his brother against the responsibility he'd already taken on here. Ranger came to stand beside him, leaning slightly against Cole's leg, amber eyes locked on his. The dog didn't know the details, but he understood the urgency. Lily was watching too, her chin lifted, trying not to look afraid. Finally, Cole looked at Harlow. You stay here with them. Lock the place down. If anyone comes near, you make sure they don't get inside. I'll go to the ridge and bring Ethan's team back." Harlow nodded, his jaw tightening. "Copy that. I'll keep them safe." Cole turned to Lily. "Stay inside, listen to Harlow, and don't open that door for anyone but me." She hesitated, then said, "If you find the cabin on the east slope, the one I told you about, it might be warmer than the ridge. If they're hurt, it's safer to stop there." Cole gave a short nod, tucking the information away. Every detail could matter. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, checked his sidearm, and stepped back into the cutting cold, the snow already swirling higher around his boots. The tire tracks by the tree line were nearly gone now, buried under fresh snow, but he didn't need them to know that both his missions, the one in the forest and the one inside the outpost, were on a collision course. By mid-afternoon, the blizzard's roar had dulled into an eerie, muffled quiet. Snow still fell in slow, heavy flakes, but the wind had lost its vicious edge, and visibility had stretched to a hazy 100 yards. The silence was deceptive. It made every sound sharper. Every crunch under Cole's boots seemed too loud. He moved through the snow-covered yard behind the outpost, scanning the tree line that loomed like a wall of black needles against the white sky. That was when he saw them. Fresh tire tracks, smaller than the ones from the pickup earlier, curving in from the south and disappearing into the woods behind the station. Whoever had driven them had been close enough to see the outpost's back entrance. Inside, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, brushing her fingers through Ranger's thick coat. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his injured leg tucked under him. His ears twitched at every creak and gust outside, the way trained dogs never truly rest. Cole crouched beside them. "We're moving you somewhere safer," he said. Lily's eyes widened, but she didn't protest. She'd learned enough in her short years to recognize when adults were serious. The outpost's safe room was a small, reinforced chamber built beneath the supply closet, designed for short-term shelter during raids or severe storms. Cole guided them inside. The space was just big enough for a cot, a heater, and a few crates of emergency rations. "Stay here until I get back," he told her, locking the heavy steel door from the outside. "Harlow's right upstairs. If you hear his voice, it's safe. No one else." Lily nodded, clutching Ranger's collar. The dog gave a low woof, as if acknowledging the order. Cole left them there and checked his gear rifle slung, sidearm holstered, rope coiled at his hip. The snow crunched underfoot as he headed north toward the coordinates he'd marked on the map. The world was muted, colors reduced to shades of gray and white. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach the rim of a narrow gorge where the road cut through the slope in a sharp bend. That was where he saw it, a dark shape half buried in snow, metal twisted and glass shattered. A rescue truck flipped onto its side against the guardrail. He slid down the embankment carefully, boots slipping on ice. The cab door was bent but not locked. He forced it open to find two men inside. The driver, a man in his early 50s with a weathered, sunburned face and a close-cropped beard, was dazed but conscious. His name tag read R. McCullen, a veteran of the rescue unit. "Matthews," McCullen rasped, relief flooding his eyes. "We hit black ice. Lost control." In the back seat, half pinned under a crate of medical gear, was Ethan. His face was pale, lips cracked from the cold, and a gash on his forehead trickled dried blood. He was conscious but sluggish, his brown hair matted with ice. At 33, Ethan was lean and wiry, his usual restless energy absent, replaced by a quiet grimace of pain. "Don't move," Cole said, kneeling to check his brother's leg. Swelling under the fabric told him enough it was broken, though the bleeding had stopped. Ethan's hazel eyes, so much like his own, met his with weary focus. "Knew you'd come," Ethan muttered. Cole worked quickly, freeing Ethan from the crate and splinting the leg with strips of metal from a broken door frame. McCullen winced as Cole helped him out of the cab. The older man's left wrist was clearly dislocated. Cole got them both upright, leaning heavily on him as they started toward the tree line where the slope was shallowest. Halfway up, a sound cut through the still air, a faint hum, too steady for wind. Cole froze, straining his ears. Over the crest of the hill, two distant figures emerged, moving with purpose. They weren't trudging like hikers. They walked in a straight line, heads swiveling as if searching. Both wore dark parkas with fur-lined hoods, and each carried something long over their shoulders. Not rifles, but the shapes were wrong for trekking poles. Cole's stomach tightened. They were heading toward the outpost. Harlow's there with Lily, Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. Cole's mind raced. The gorge path curved behind the ridge. If he took McCullen and Ethan back the long way, they could avoid being seen. But it would mean slowing down, and those two men would reach the outpost long before he did. The decision burned, but instinct sharpened his focus. "We keep moving," he told them, adjusting Ethan's arm over his shoulders. "Stay quiet. If I have to break off, follow the ridge until you see the watchtower light." McCullen gave a short nod, gritting his teeth as they pressed on. Behind them, the shapes of the two men shrank into the snowfall, their direction unmistakable straight for the building where Lily and Ranger were hiding. By the time Cole reached the cover of the tree line, his breath was sharp in his lungs, and snow clung to every seam of his uniform. He glanced once over his shoulder toward the outpost. The sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains, casting a pale gold line along the horizon, and in that dimming light, the danger felt closer than ever. The storm had given them a few hours of shelter. Now, it seemed, the real trouble was walking out of the woods. The trek back to the outpost was a grueling mix of urgency and restraint. Cole had McCullen on his left and Ethan on his right, both leaning into him as they moved through knee-deep snow. The sun had dropped lower, painting the clouds in muted bands of amber and violet. Shadows stretched long across the drifts, and the temperature was falling fast again. Every few minutes, Cole's eyes flicked toward the trail ahead, scanning for movement, listening for anything out of place. By the time the dark outline of Outpost Haven emerged through the trees, Cole's gut was already telling him they were too late. The snow around the back entrance was disturbed, churned into chaotic patterns of boot prints. The heavy steel door to the supply closet, the one that concealed the safe room, hung slightly ajar. "Stay here," Cole ordered, lowering McCullen and Ethan behind the shelter of a snowbank. Ethan tried to protest, but Cole's look silenced him. Moving low, rifle raised, Cole approached the outpost. He could hear voices inside, two male voices, rough, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. The front door had been forced inward, its hinges bent. Inside, Corporal Harlow stood with his back to the wall, sidearm drawn, facing two intruders. Both men were dressed in heavy parkas with fur-lined hoods, snow crusted along the hems. The taller one, maybe mid-40s, had a square jaw covered in coarse stubble and cold gray eyes that didn't blink often. His parka was unzipped just enough to reveal the grip of a holstered pistol. The other, younger by a decade, had a narrow, fox-like face with a thin scar running from his right ear to the corner of his mouth. He was more restless, shifting from foot to foot, a combat knife glinting in his right hand. Lily was backed into a corner, pressed against the wall beside the stove. Ranger was in front of her, teeth bared, his injured leg trembling but holding. The low, rumbling growl in his chest was steady and deliberate. "Put the dog down, girl," the scarred man said, his voice carrying a false calm that only made it more menacing. "Over my dead body," Lily shot back, her voice high but firm. Cole stepped through the doorway in one smooth motion, rifle trained on the taller man. "That can be arranged for you," Cole said flatly. The room froze for a heartbeat. Harlow's eyes flicked toward Cole but stayed focused on his target. The taller man turned his head slightly, sizing Cole up. "You're Sergeant Matthews," he said, as if confirming a detail. "We're here for the dog, nothing else. Step aside." "That's not happening," Cole replied. The standoff snapped like a wire when the scarred man lunged toward Lily. Ranger launched himself forward, a blur of fur and muscle, slamming into the attacker's arm and clamping his jaws down on the wrist holding the knife. The man roared in pain, the knife clattering to the floor. Cole pivoted, striking the taller man's weapon aside before driving his shoulder into him, forcing him back against the wall. The fight was fast and brutal. The taller man swung a heavy fist, catching Cole in the ribs, but Cole drove a knee upward, knocking the breath out of him. Across the room, Harlow had already kicked the knife out of reach and was pressing his boot into the scarred man's chest, pinning him to the ground while Ranger growled inches from his face. Cole wrenched the pistol from the taller man's holster, tossed it toward Harlow, then slammed the intruder's arm behind his back. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man just sneered, lips pressed tight. Cole searched him quickly, pulling a folded map from one pocket and, from another, a small USB drive encased in a waterproof casing. It was marked with a faded blue sticker, barely legible. Inventory, East Route. Cole's instincts told him it was more than just a shipping log. He shoved it into his own pocket before hauling the man toward the wall and securing him with a zip tie from the gear cabinet. Harlow did the same with the scarred one, whose wrist now bled freely where Ranger had bitten down. "You're going to want a medic for that," Cole said coldly, "but you're not getting it here." Lily stayed in the corner until Ranger limped back to her side, panting heavily. She sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Good boy," she whispered. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor. Cole glanced toward the safe room and saw that the door was still locked from the outside. Harlow had moved them before the intruders broke in. "You did the right thing," Cole told him. When McCullen and Ethan were brought in from outside, Ethan's eyes went immediately to Lily and Ranger. "Guess we made it just in time," he said, though his voice was tight with pain. Cole handed the USB to Harlow. "This might be the key. If what I think's on here is actually here, it could tie Kane to a weapons smuggling ring and explain why they want Ranger so badly." Harlow's brow furrowed. "We'll need to get it to the sheriff." "Not yet," Cole said. "We hold them here until the weather clears. Then we take it straight to someone we trust. If Kane has half the reach I think he does, we can't risk it getting buried." The taller man gave a low, humorless laugh. "You have no idea what you're in the middle of, soldier." Cole stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "I know enough, and now you're going to sit there and think about how badly you failed." The wind outside had picked up again, rattling the window panes. Inside the outpost, the air was tense but steady. The immediate danger had passed, but Cole knew this was just one battle in a larger fight. Still, for the moment, Lily and Ranger were safe, and that was enough to keep him moving forward. By the time the last patches of snow retreated from the meadows, Montana had transformed from a monochrome world of ice into one painted with soft greens and bursts of wildflowers. The rivers swelled with meltwater, carrying the scent of pine and earth downstream. Rockford Ridge felt alive again, the stillness of winter replaced by the sound of distant cattle bells and the whistle of trains cutting through the valley. Cole stood outside Outpost Haven, leaning against the rail of the porch, the sun warming his shoulders. It was strange to think that only weeks earlier, this same stretch of land had been under siege from both nature and man. The aftermath of the confrontation had been swift, but far from simple. The 2 men captured in the outpost had been transferred to county custody as soon as the storm cleared. The USB Cole had taken from the taller man's pocket turned out to be more than just a weapons inventory. It was a ledger containing names, dates, and drop locations for an entire smuggling network operating across 3 states. Travis Kane's name appeared in bold on multiple entries. That evidence had been enough for Sheriff Marla Peterson to assemble a joint task force with federal agents. Marla was in her mid-50s, tall and solid, with hair the color of steel wool cut to the jawline. She carried herself with a no-nonsense authority that came from 30 years in law enforcement, but she also had a dry sense of humor that could disarm even the most tense situation. She'd grown up in Rockford Ridge, the daughter of a rancher, and had once considered leaving for a career in Denver before the sudden death of her younger brother in a ranch accident kept her rooted here. That loss had made her fiercely protective of the people in her jurisdiction. Under her coordination, Kane's properties were raided. Firearms, stolen goods, and encrypted ledgers were seized. Several arrests followed, and within a fortnight, the smuggling ring's hierarchy began to crumble. Lily's name never appeared in any court record, her part in the events shielded from public view to keep her safe. Lily and Ranger had been placed temporarily with the Carters, a couple who ran a small farm on the edge of Willow Bend, the nearest town with a proper school. Tom Carter was a tall, easygoing man in his early 60s with skin tanned from decades of working outdoors and a slow drawl that made every sentence feel like an unhurried story. His wife, Helen, was a slim, sharp-eyed woman with silver hair tied in a neat bun. Helen had a kindness that ran deep, though it was filtered through a brisk efficiency. She had been a schoolteacher for most of her life and believed in structure as much as in affection. They had raised 3 children of their own, all now grown and living out of state, and their home had been quiet for years until Lily arrived. Cole visited often in those first few weeks after the thaw. Each time he found Lily looking stronger, her cheeks rosier, her laughter easier. She had her own room now, painted a pale yellow with a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Ranger had claimed the patch of floor by her window, from where he could watch the yard. His limp had faded with rest and care, though a faint stiffness remained in cold mornings. Ethan, meanwhile, had healed faster than expected. His leg, set with surgical precision at the county hospital, had mended well enough for him to start light duty within a month. Cole found his brother back in uniform one crisp April morning, grinning despite the lingering stiffness in his gait. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you?" Ethan had said, clapping him on the shoulder. One afternoon in late spring, as Cole was finishing inventory at the outpost, the mail truck pulled up. The driver, a young woman with a braid nearly to her waist and a cheerful manner that contrasted with Cole's stoicism, handed him a large envelope marked with the insignia of the U.S. Border Patrol K-9 Division. Inside was a formal letter on thick, embossed paper. It began with commendations, an acknowledgement of the events during the blizzard, of the risk taken to protect a civilian and assist in dismantling a criminal network. Then came the part that made him pause. In recognition of his bravery and service in defending a civilian under imminent threat, the K-9 known as Ranger will be awarded the title of K-9 Honor with full ceremonial recognition. In light of his bond with Sergeant Cole Matthews, it has been determined that Ranger will be retired from any prior claims of ownership and entrusted to live out his life under Sergeant Matthews' care. Cole read the paragraph twice, his throat tightening. Outside the window, the mountains stood sharp against the blue sky, their snowcaps gleaming. He pictured Ranger's amber eyes, the steady, intelligent gaze of an animal who had stood his ground when it mattered most. 2 days later, he drove out to Willow Bend. The Carter's farm was busy with the season's chores. Tom was mending a fence. Helen was tending to a patch of early lettuce. Lily was sitting cross-legged in the grass with Ranger beside her, reading aloud from a worn adventure book. Ranger's ears twitched at Cole's approach, and he rose to greet him with a slow wag of his tail. "I got something for you," Cole said, kneeling to ruffle the fur along the dog's neck. He showed Lily the letter, watching her eyes widen. "It means he's yours," he explained. "Yours and mine, if that's all right. He won't ever have to go anywhere he doesn't want to again." Lily's arms wrapped around Ranger instantly, her face buried in his coat. "He's home," she whispered, and though her voice was quiet, it carried with the certainty of someone who had spent enough time without one. Cole stayed for supper that evening, the first truly relaxed meal he'd had in months. The kitchen was warm, smelling of Helen's cornbread and roast chicken. Tom told a story about the time a calf had wandered into their pantry, and even Cole found himself laughing. Ranger lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to rest it against his boot. When he drove back to Rockford Ridge under the soft light of a spring moon, Cole felt something he hadn't allowed himself in a long while, not just relief, but the sense that some small corner of the world had been set right. The roads were clear now, the air carrying the scent of thawed earth and budding pines, and in his passenger seat, for the first of many rides to come, Ranger sat with his head out the window, ears catching the wind. Sometimes the storms in our lives are not made of snow and wind, but of fear, loneliness, and the weight of protecting those we love. This story reminds us that courage is not only found on battlefields, but also in quiet choices to stand between someone vulnerable and the danger closing in. In everyday life, we all have the chance to be someone's shelter, someone's safe place, no matter how small the act may seem. If this story touched your heart, share it with others so its message can travel further. Leave a comment with your thoughts and let us know if you have ever met a person or an animal who became your protector. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and courage. May God bless you and keep you safe. And if you believe in the power of love and protection, comment Amen below.